I wanted to round off the whole line of punk genres by a note, a footnote you could call it, on punk genres in general and on genres I have not mentioned here. And the reason is not just to round up the lesser punk genres, of which there are probably too many to even for even me to list here. I probably don't even know half of them. But more so because punk as a suffix to genre has become a bit of a nuisance because, like I mentioned with steampunk, a lot of it tends to be aimed at the style or the visuals rather than the idea of punk as a story element. It becomes it becomes just a fashion statement more than an actual statement, and that bothers me a lot. Uh, I've seen I've seen such subgenres as deco punk, which is basically just an extreme version of the Art Deco movement from fashion movement or design movement from I believe the 20s or 30s or something. Um, it's just a way to make things look. It doesn't have any kind of story element really to it. Not that I'm aware of, and it usually represents itself very openly like that. There's also diesel punk, which attempts have been made at making it a real and actual kind of punk genre, but mostly it's still just a visual concept of giant machines from metal and mechanics, um, based very much on the science fiction cartoon whatever shows of the 50s where technology is big, clunky, and experimental. There is another genre that leans a little against it, atom punk, which I'm going to mention in another video because that is a kind of special deal because it's kind of spawned off or spawned from another genre, which is the one I'm going to grapple with next. But other punk genres, or some also called other punk, um, which is it's just the concept of adding punk as a shallow surface texture to something that already exists, usually a historical period or some kind of design trend. And you can do that with anything. You can have Rome punk or Greece punk or Inca punk, or you can have, let's see, goth punk. I've actually seen that attempted, but it was just what I saw was just as shallow as anything else. Looked great, but there is no punk element to the story, or there wasn't in the examples I saw. The punk concept, the punk genres, it is about struggle. Punk originally comes from counterculture, meaning it is literally about sticking it to the man. It's about refusing modern, widely accepted social trends. It's refusing to be normal, actively refusing to be normal, not refusing to be normal because no, I'm different and I'm not going to sell out, but actively saying I don't like normal, so now I will actively redesign my life or myself or whatever my world in order to not belong in the normal category. It's a very active, rebellious. concept, even if in reality it did also stay mostly cosmetic. A lot of music, a lot of fashion, but limited social impact. And the punk notion in story genres is, well, any genre is whatever you make of it. But to me, at least, and to many I've known who think about these things, punk is about enormous social gaps and injustices and a very either nihilistic or naive struggle against powers that are too great for you to actually have an impact on. It's anti heroes, it's gray morals, if there are even morals involved at all. It is a lot of very, not dystopian, but very dark stuff. And then it's given a glossy veneer of a society where the materialistic things are going great, but the social, the psychological, and moral things are not going great. So you could actually have punk genres that are completely devoid of any kind of flashy style, because what you need is some really great power that is almost impossible to struggle against, but people still refuse to just get in line, and they kind of make their lives in the cracks or by pretending to, well, fall in line. And yet the darker elements that they keep struggling against, they're just too great. They will infect everyone at some point or another. Everybody goes bad if you just push them hard enough. There is darkness everywhere, and any fight against it is temporary and likely doomed from the start. It's a very nihilistic genre, full of nihilistic and or naive characters. So when you have something that is just a lot of fancy gadgets, it just becomes an alternate kind of basic sci-fi, and that's fine in its own way. You can have non-punk steampunk. I don't know what to call it. Just calling it steam seems silly. Steam sci-fi, maybe. You can have steam sci-fi with your huge steam machines and fancy gadgets, top hats, canes, and all that. And that's perfectly fine, but it's not steampunk. It's just steam sci-fi, steam-based sci-fi. And the term for that is a term that is sometimes used broadly and sometimes used very narrowly on a specific version of it, but retro sci-fi, meaning essentially science fiction as it would look from the point of view of someone living in the past. How would someone living in the 1800s think that sci-fi would look? It would probably be either steampunk or steam sci-fi style, because we base our beliefs of the future in what we see around us in the present. And retro sci-fi is usually about the sci-fi um, version found in the 70s or thereabout, with lots of chrome, spacesuits, colonies on the moon, lots of flying cars, and dads and fedoras and housewives in nice dresses and robot butlers and all that. Basically, Jetsons. Um, but retro sci-fi is essentially any kind of science fiction that is built on the understandings and the beliefs of the future that you find in someone in the past. You can have retro sci-fi from the 80s too. The best example I can think of is the future sequences from Back to the Future, with their neon bright fashions and, well, flying cars again. There you have it. And that's not punk. That's not cyberpunk, but it is cyber. So it's cyber sci-fi, you could call it, I guess. But it's not punk. And that distinction, I feel, should be there in order to make punk genres matter. You want to create sci-fi based on the past? Fine, go ahead. It can be really cool, but it's not necessarily a punk genre. The punk suffix just sounds really cool. One of the latest additions that kind of bothers me, but I'm trying not to get too upset about it because I'm not sure if I know enough about it, is solar punk, which is in many ways the absolute opposite of a punk genre. It's about um, adapting society to the problems we have today and actually solving the problems as opposed to the punk genres, which revel in the problems just growing bigger and bigger. It's about living off the grid. It's about the solar comes from solar energy, of course, but renewable energy in general. It's about um, pollution reduction and all that. And it is, I don't know if it's actually a fictional style yet or if it's just a concept genre for art. And I know there are some video games. I believe there's mostly strategy, but it could work as a science fiction genre. But calling it solar punk is kind of diluting the whole punk concept because this is far more optimistic, unless it has a dark side that I haven't encountered in my studies yet. It might. But yeah, there are plenty of punk genres out there, and most of them are just the word punk put on the end of something, and the genre doesn't really do anything punk. It's just another kind of science fiction. Um, the punk genre is about the lower or middle classes being on the edge of destitution, on the brink of destruction all the time because power is so centralized that the real powers in society are almost untouchables. And morals are out the window. It's just about power and about making it from day to day, depending on who you are. And then you have the whole technology or magic um, flavor added to it. So, yeah, plenty of other punk exists, but look deeper before you actually assume that something is an actual punk genre. Diesel punk, I'm sure you could make it punk, but the examples I've seen have been nothing like it. Deco punk seems to proudly be only about the visuals. Solar punk seems to be the complete opposite of any punk genre, and so on and so forth. I'll briefly mention atom punk in the next video, as I mentioned. But yeah, look deeper to see if your punk is true punk.